All right, guys, welcome back to another video on the channel today. Today, got my 04.5 LLY Duramax Chevy 2500 HD. You guys clicked on this video because you already know what's up. I'm gonna let this old girl breathe a little bit better today. Got myself a Banks Ram Air intake, and honestly, there are a few other intakes I was looking at on the market, and not really a whole lot of review videos per se on just one intake over the other. So I figured I'd make a video on this and give you guys my impressions on it. Maybe I'm a fail for marketing, but I don't know. Gale Banks seems to know what he's talking about, and I feel like that he's actually put some real science and research into some of his products and not just trying to pretty them up for Instagram. I mean, this thing doesn't even have a clear window on it to look at the pretty oil filter, and it was a little bit more than some of the other options out in the market. So I'm planning on throwing some EFI Live on this truck sooner than later, and I figured I'd throw this on there just in case it gives me just a little bit more out of my tuning, or I can get more out of the intake through the tuning by having it on there first. So if we take a look under the hood here, we are working with a stock intake box, and I do this and you'll see why in a little bit, but this is just the stock intake box, stock piping. Until you get to the actual mouthpiece, we have an S&B mouthpiece there, just because the factory one, and I did buy the truck like this, but the factory mouthpiece, for those of you who don't know, was actually pretty restrictive. So just having that on there alone is enough of an upgrade. Also, I'll have you keep in mind that there is no resonator on top of this intake, so it's already a little bit louder than your stock Duramax intake would be. But granted, this truck is nearly 20 years old at the time of recording this, so granted, they're already kind of loud versus my dad's nice L5P sitting next to me here. That thing's pretty quiet, but she sounds like a beast nonetheless. Alrighty, also everything I got in the package here: new box, new intake piping, silicone fittings, new hose clamps, and I opted to go with the oiled filter. And just for a little added protection, I did go ahead and buy a pre-screen for this, just to help keep any bugs or bigger particles from getting stuck inside these fins here. That way, when I do clean this down in the future, it is going to be a lot easier not having to clear out these pleats, because it does have a pre-screen on there. It does come with an instruction manual like any cold air intake. This should be pretty straightforward. Not going to bore you guys with going through step by step with it. I'm going to go ahead and crank it up, give it a few little revs so you can kind of hear what it sounds like before just sitting here, and we'll kind of compare audio after. All right, so now we have these guys side by side here, and you're gonna see what I mean by stock with this particular intake. But you'll see, you come over here, it's just that elbow right before you hit that mouthpiece is just a lot smoother on the Banks here. The factory has just got some sharp cuts on it. This is just very smooth transitioning into it. And same with how the air flows out of the box, actually. Keep in mind, I paid for this with my own money. Banks isn't paying me to promote their product or anything. See here, we just got a lot bigger of an intake there versus this. We're kind of restricted with our little inlets, but you can also see in there, it sucks air from the side here and it goes through the sharp angle into the filter, and it basically has to go up through the filter and then come out and follow its way in. Versus the Bank system, an outlet going down, and an inlet coming from the bottom and an inlet coming from the side, and this big filter sits in there facing the other direction down, and it's just able to all breathe in nice and easy, come up through the top here, it'll float through the top here, and it just has a lot smoother curvature. I mean, like even this right here, we can look at the size comparison here, but also just the overall shape of it too. I am holding this a little higher so it looks a little bigger on camera, but it is just a lot softer of an angle, whereas this has a pretty hard 90 going into it. So air will just be able to flow a lot easier through the system. And here's what I mean this being stock. Someone before me has modified this. I think I'm the third or fourth owner on this truck, so it hasn't been passed through too many hands. Somebody cut a hole in an intake box for this truck and tried to make their own like Banks super scoop, and had some air coming down, and kind of it ran down in the front of the truck there. That's modification number one. Number two, this top and this bottom to the box are not the same piece, because if you'll look here, this screw doesn't line up where this hole lines up, and almost looks like they've cut away at the box here. So that air filter has been allowing air to come in right through there, because he wasn't able to properly seal down right there. All the other holes line up, but not that guy. So I feel a lot better about just putting this in there, just because of this right here. That's a point where contamination could get into my engine and damage it. So I'm gonna feel a lot better about getting this replaced, and we're gonna hopefully get some cool turbo noises and maybe some more usable power out of this as well. And there is our final product. She ain't anything too fancy and flashy like for Instagram, but as I mentioned before, I think this will be a nice upgrade over what was in the truck prior. Got that all crusty dusty one out of there. All right, first crank up with the new intake. Let's hope nothing blows up. All right, y'all, welcome back. Me from the future. Got a little bit cleaner haircut and not so clean facial cut. But I mentioned we're from the future, approximately 1 year and 1 month in the future. Let's see how this cold air intake has been holding up and just give you my overall impressions. After about a year and a month, not too much of a benchmark if we're gonna be honest here, but everything is holding up as you would hope and expect, especially on a product coming from Banks and how much they cost. But all of our bands are holding up, all of our rubber components are holding up. There's not really a whole lot to say other than that everything's been holding up fine. Once again, she ain't that Instagram pretty with a clear filter housing on it. I bought this for function, not for looks. Part of the reason why I didn't bother polishing up the engine bay. It's an engine bay. I'm not gonna act like it's something pretty or whatever. It's a 20-year-old truck with 210,000 miles. Another note on that, I installed this cold air intake when the truck had about 275,000 miles on it, and currently the truck has got 210,000 miles on it. So even though it's only been about a year and a month, we've put a substantial amount of mileage on the intake, enough where I've had to actually clean the filter twice. As you remember, I got the oiled filter with the pre-screen. This sucker goes off-road a ton with really fine dusty roads, and that pre-screen really gets plugged up. I wouldn't say easily, but probably a little bit easier than the dry filter would, but wasn't really a big deal. Able to pop it off, wash it, rinse it. Real simple, just like any other oiled filter would. Let's go over performance or just differences. As far as sound goes, me being the owner of this truck who daily drives it, I personally do notice a little bit of a noise difference. You could definitely hear the turbo spool down better. Once the truck is revved up and you let off the engine, kind of like at idle there, you can really hear that turbo whistle winding down. You could hear it before, but not nearly as prominent as with this new intake on it. My buddy who drove an LBZ, he got in the passenger seat of this thing, couldn't tell a difference on it. So if you're looking to buy this intake for just noise, probably not worth the money. It's an old Duramax. It was already loud to begin with, so it already had that going for it. Now, my same buddy has a 2020 Cummins. He put a Banks intake on that truck, and these new diesels are so quiet from the factory, couldn't even hear the turbo on it. He put that on. That's an instance where if you want noise, it actually can make a difference. Now, as far as performance goes, I'm not gonna say that stock is better, because obviously I had a faulty whatever Frankenstein box that was in there before. By the good old butt dyno, I'd say it's maybe adding, if anything, at most 5 horsepower. Now, I never took the time or had the luxury of putting on a dyno to see how much of a difference it made for you, but I am sure that with the tuning that I have done to this truck, that it did help with a little bit of difference. As far as daily driving it, could be placebo effect, but after a year, I do think it does help a little bit with spool up, because I did drive the truck for about 2.5 months stock tuning before I did put that cold air intake. I'm sorry, before I put the tuning on there. And I will say in that time, I would like to say that it does spool up just a little bit more. Last thing I want to go over that I know a lot of people ask about when it comes to mods like this is fuel economy. Are you going to see any increase on your efficiency on the truck? If I did pick up any economy in this truck because of just the intake alone, I would say it would have been no more than half a mile to the gallon. So in my personal opinion, definitely not something to throw some money at if you're looking at specifically getting fuel economy out of the mod. So final thoughts on the Banks intake. I've got no complaints with it. Sure, you are going to see a little bit of improvement on it. Is it going to be, I don't even know how much they're going for nowadays, a $350 intake? Are you going to see $350 of improvement out of it? That's up for debate. I'm personally going to say no. If you have the money and you're hurting to put an intake on it, go right ahead. I have zero complaints. I'll give you nothing to steer you away from it. If you are looking for something that you can physically feel a difference and put your money towards it, I'd say tuning is definitely the way to go. That's the biggest thing I put onto this truck that I could just, wow, notice an actual difference. But yeah, other than that, intakes work just fine. Once again, Banks did not pay me to make this video. I paid for this with my own money and put my own time into this. So if you guys found this helpful or informative in some sort of way, it really mean a lot to me. If you go ahead and just hit that like button down below, all it takes is one little click. I'd really appreciate it. If you want to see more content on the truck, maybe hit that subscribe button down below. I'm going to be doing some reviews on this LLY. If there's anything you want to see done to this truck, let me know in the comment section down below as well. I'm going to do a ownership review on it and whatnot, and all kinds of problems I've had with it, or not problems I've had with it.